Welcome to Reinventing Yourself in Changing Times, the summit series on finding clarity, direction, and the next steps in your life journey. I'm your host, Mita Wise, wellness entrepreneur, and here today with us is Neal Powless. Neal is a University Ombuds at Syracuse University, and he's a traditional member of the Onondaga Nation and Eel Clan. As a co-producer for the major motion picture Crooked Arrows, Neal was responsible for native storyline development, cultural sensitivity, and procuring financial investments. He co-produced the New York Emmy Nominated Game of Life, Heart and Soul of the Onondaga, a short documentary about the cultural origins of the game of lacrosse, as well as collaborated with ESPN on multiple film projects. He's taught courses and presented across the country for nearly 20 years about Indigenous culture and value systems. And he's the co-founder and co-owner of Indigenous Concepts Consulting, a firm that he currently runs with his wife, Michelle, to bridge Native American ideals and culture with organizations and individuals all over the world. He's had a professional career in lacrosse, being a 3-time All-American lacrosse player, and he went on to be head coach in Netherlands for the national lacrosse team, then the Netherlands national box lacrosse team. In 2019, they placed 8th in the World Championships in Vancouver. Mr. Powless has a master's in counseling from Syracuse University and a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Nazareth College. He resides in upstate New York with his wife, Michelle Shenandoah Powless, and their 4 children. His summit topic today is From Athlete to Academic, a journey of survival. Wow, and welcome, Neal.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
We're very honored and happy to have you here too. Thank you. Neal, at this point, I often ask my speakers to tell us a little bit about their story. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about your Native American origins.
Sure. I grew up at Onondaga, which is 5 miles south of Syracuse, New York, in my traditional homelands. So the Onondaga are the member nation of the Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy or the Six Nations Confederacy. And so we're made up of the Mohawk, if we look geographically, the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Seneca. And then in the 1700s, the Tuscaroras came from the south, and we brought them into under our umbrella of peace. And so together we make up the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And so I grew up in Onondaga, and I come from a family of leadership. So we're a matrilineal society. So all the power resides within the women's and in our structure. And so all the clan mothers choose the chiefs. And so that means that somebody else's mom chose my grandfather to be a chief of his clan. Somebody else's mom chose my dad to be a chief of his clan, a separate clan from his dad. And then another person's mother chose my brother to be the leader of my clan, right? Yet separate from so because it's a matrilineal system, these men as chiefs were actually representing different interests than or even in their own household and their own children, because their children were members of other clans. And so I grew up in this political system. My sister is one of my brother's faith keepers, right? So she's also in a leadership title. And so I grew up with this environment and a lot of space of understanding compassion, how to communicate, right? Moving through conflict and transitioning from conflict into what would be collaboration or consensus, because all of our political agreements are agreed upon by consensus. So everyone has to come of one mind. So whenever we get together, we do what's called the Ganahanyu, or a Handagaiwadikwi, the opening address, the words that come before all others. And what we do is we say, and da onehia, and now we will bring our minds together as one. And so every time we meet, we bring our minds together as one, and they make a decision as one. And then at the end of the meeting, they say, and now, da onehia, you are released. And so then they go and they travel on their own spaces. And then every time they meet again, they bring it back together in the moment and now. So a lot of our process, our political structures are about bringing information into that moment now so you can make the best decision in that moment for the good of all people.
Wow, isn't that amazing?
So that's the type of environment I grew up in, right? Understanding those type of discussions, understanding the relationship to the culture and the heritage and those type of things. The one thing that I was missing in that, which was a big part of my worldly transition and as I moved through, was that I was exposed very heavily to the culture and all of it. But my grandfather spoke the language and actually performed the ceremonies, but my dad did not speak the language. And so so we didn't speak the language in the house. So the only exposure I had to language was in the language program that we had in the school system, the K kindergarten through 8. So then after that, when I went to high school, no more language again, right? And so in my family, that was that kind of this weird thing where we didn't speak the language. Some other families did, some others didn't. And so that was always something that kind of stuck with me, and it kind of made me take pause on some things sometimes as a young adult. But what's important to understand that is why, right? So at the time of my grandfather, he passed in 1985. When he was alive, when he was a young man, that was very clear attacks on Indigenous people in way of culture and way of being. The boarding school system is a terrible part of American history that isn't often discussed. And because of that, he and all the other elders within our community made a conscious decision not to teach their children how to speak the language for fear that they would be attacked or criticized or ostracized by United States government policy. And the irony is that even within my family, I'm the youngest of all of my siblings. I still was born without the ability to actually go to ceremony and speak the language without breaking US law. So it wasn't until 1978, and I was born in 1974, that it was actually legal for Indigenous people to practice our ceremonial cultures and religious practices. But in Onondaga, they continued to do it week after week, every ceremony, every moon when it came up, every cycle that was part of our cycle, we did our ceremonies, despite of the fact that we knew that we could possibly be arrested. So that was something that my grandfather consciously did. And he conducted those ceremonies and invited those nations to come and relearn, because some of those communities had stopped doing it. Some of those other nations had stopped doing it. And so he said, no, come on in, I'll teach you. And so he brought them in and taught them. And so now some of those other nations have the ceremonies again now because because Onondaga held on to it. And there's articles in the Syracuse newspaper that talk about the heathens celebrating the moon. Wow. As we knew that we had to keep that practice alive.
That's amazing. And I'm so grateful you did. And I'm sure you're even more grateful. Right?
Very much so.
I know that your Native American roots and what you just described has really formed who you are today. And we'll talk more about that later. But first, I know as a young adult, you became an athlete. Can you tell us a little bit about that and that part of your life? I know you have many parts of your life, right? Many paths. If you could tell us a little bit about that one.
Certainly. My lacrosse is something that's been in my family. So the origins of the contemporary game of lacrosse, the long stick and ball version of the game, actually has its roots within the Haudenosaunee, right? So there are other versions. And even as you go out to Menominee and some of those other spaces in the Northeast, some of the other woodland Indigenous communities, you'll see a very similar sport being played with similar sticks. The difference being that the goals were singular poles and you hit the ball with the pole. The Haudenosaunee's version of our stick and ball game had 2 poles. So it looked like a goal, right? So that's why we say the contemporary version of lacrosse with the goal was our version, because it had 2 poles and you passed the ball between the posts. That's how you scored a point. And so lacrosse has been a part of my culture and our identity of who we are since the beginning of time. And so my grandfather played professional in the 1930s. My dad, his famous claim to fame is that he knocked down Jim Brown, one of the only men to ever do it in the game of lacrosse, right? The famous Jim Brown football player. My eldest brother, who's 17 years older than me, played professional in the early 1990s. And so when I came through in the late 90s, early 2000s, I had the opportunity to also play professionally, but it was part of one of those things that was in my blood. So it wasn't like, this is what you're expected to do, but certainly my dad instilled a variety of different value systems, and my mom predominantly really creating this idea of show up, do your best, be coachable, right? So if you're going to do something, you might as well do your best, right? So you show up, you find out, right? You don't know if it's going to be fun to jump off a cliff into the water until you jump off the cliff and jump in the water, right? You jump and find out, you show up, right? And when you do it, if you're going to do it, then you do the best you can. You ask questions, you find out how to do it, you allow people, you're open to the opportunity to learn about what's the best way to do this, what's the most efficient way to do this, what can be helpful to be successful, how do I survive this, right? So certainly being open. So show up, do your best, be coachable was something that was really a big part of my culture identity and upbringing. And so when it came to the sport of lacrosse, it was just show up to practice, show up to the game. When you get there, do your best when you're there and be coachable, be open. You can always learn something new. And my dad he passed away a few years ago, but he used to love to say, that's all I taught my kids to do. And they showed up and they ended up being the best in the spaces they were in. And certainly I didn't start out that way. I was small for my age. I was smaller than my friends. It was a constant uphill battle. I had to learn a lot of different things to keep pushing and persevering and being able to survive being pounded on and beaten on by my bigger cousins and my bigger friends, because they're all mostly bigger than me. And so when it came time to when we finally, our height and our weight got to a generally closer range, certainly I had all these other abilities that I had developed in order to be successful as a smaller kid, so that by the time I was of the same size, they had a hard time keeping up with me. And they had a hard time equaling my skills because I had focused so heavily on developing them and spent so many hours to do that. So that was really the secret, and it was just love of the game. We have this spiritual connection. It is the medicine game. There's a lot of documentaries out there about it. You can look at and see those things. I'm working on another one right now. And what it really talks about is just that the spiritual relationship, that connection, that when we play on this plane, in this earthly space, that our ancestors are playing along with us at the same time. And so when we run, I used a visual in the Crooked Arrows where we have a guy running down the side of the field, and then you have him running in between cheerleaders, and then it splits screen and it splits and transitions to see this other image of thousands of years earlier, where a man is running through the woods and you see the trees and he's running through the trees, and then it splits back to the guy running through the cheerleaders, so you can see that they're literally running together. And that's how we feel when we play the sport. The men and the women, when they play the game, they feel that connection, that it's literally that close, that their ancestors are running with them and lifting the air underneath their feet as they're gliding across the field, and they're supporting their movements if they make transitions. And so that was the connection that I had with the sport. And so it was that joy, that relationship, that connection, that celebration, and just showing up and finding out what my gifts were, right, as an athlete, that really propelled me beyond the 3-time All-American thing and into the international field and playing internationally. And in 2002, I was voted one of the 3 best lacrosse players in the world. And that was an amazing feat, to be the first Haudenosaunee Indigenous man to be voted on the world stage to be one of the best players in the world. Before that, it was mostly Canadians and Americans that got that honor. So that was really cool to be the first one in 2002. And since then, there's been numerous ones that have come after me, but certainly a space to be proud of, to have that moment and share that with my teammates.
Absolutely.
Probably one of the most touching moments in my life to get that award and be on stage. And my team charged the stage. It was awesome.
Amazing. That's truly amazing. I'm so glad you were able to have that. Yeah. Through a lot of your hard work too, right?
years and years. Right. Yeah.
I know that some things happened to take you out of being that player, and
yeah,
go ahead.
That's part of why I got emotional, because just a few years after that, while I was still in my prime, I got sick, undisclosed, unknown. Doctors really didn't have an answer for me. They didn't really know what was going on. And I went to allergists, and I traveled the country. I would travel 4 hours just for treatments with one allergy specialist. And I traveled from Syracuse to to Minnesota, to Rochester, to the Mayo Clinic, and they did all kinds of testing. And I actually had one of my breathing fits while attached to all the machinery, and I passed out. And so I was connected to machinery that was testing everything, and they still couldn't give me an answer as to what was going on and what was wrong. And so literally years of just a few years after that, just my shining crowning moment, I was literally ripped out of my professional and international competition space. And so as a result of that, that was an exploratory surgery on my lungs. And I had actually, there was complications with that surgery. I arrested, they revived me and brought me back to life. I actually had spirits that came to me, and I can remember, and I can still recall when those spirits came to me. And I remember they were talking to me and they're saying, come on, it's time to go. And I told them, I said, no, I'm not ready. I have more to do here. And they said, well, if you're going to stay, then you need to do better than what you've been doing up to this point. So I said, okay, you give me this chance and I will come back and I will do better. I promise I will do better. And I woke up in the ICU. Really unclear about what I was going to do next, right? Because now I already started grieving the loss of my athletic and professional career and all these international things that are going on. And then to have this happen, I knew that I had to make major changes. I just really wasn't sure what. And it took another 6 to 7 months before I actually got a medical diagnosis from that surgery. So I went through all of that and waited 7 more months to find out what they had to do. And they just it seemed like they just kind of made something up because they didn't know. They still didn't know what it was. Even after cutting me open and putting me through all that, they didn't know. So I realized and recognized in that moment that it was me that had to make the change. I had to make a move to better myself. And that's when I really transitioned away from the trusting and relying heavily on the pharmaceutical solutions and health modules to really going back to my traditional ceremonies and my culture. So I also did homeopathy, I did nutritional therapy, vitamin therapy, I did cellular cleansing, I did energy work. I saw a traditional indigenous seer, and they saw some other things that I needed to work on. So I did ceremonies. And I went back to my culture, my language, so I started expanding my language, and so I went back to those spaces that I had as a kid. That really kind of fostered all of those things. And I revived my my studies, and I expanded my studies into my cultural stories, and started to learn more songs. I'd already learned songs as a kid, because I enjoyed singing, but I struggled singing because of the breathing thing. And so I had to stop singing for a while. And so I was like, nope, I'm going to keep singing through this. That's going to heal me. And so as I got better, I started singing more. And eventually, a few months after I made that transition, that decision, the conscious decision, I took my last medicines, pharmaceutical in that way, steroids and all those things in December 1, 2008. Wow. That was it. And by January, by December 30th, during Christmas break on work, right? I was on holiday work. I was laid up in bed and things were coming out of my eyes, my ears, my nose. I was draining out of every pore of my body and getting rid of all those things, and my sister even said, you want to go to the hospital? I said, no, if I'm going to survive, I have to get this, I have to get off this and break this and get a new train of thought. And so that was really what transitioned that. And so from that December to that May, I remember the first time I went for a run that April. So just a few years ago, I went for my first run, and I remember being so excited. And the next day I hurt so bad because I hadn't run in 3 years. I hadn't been able to run for 3 years. And that run hurt. My legs hurt, every bone in my body hurt. And I remember just sitting there trying to watch TV with my whole body just shaking and quivering and cramping everywhere. And I just was so happy. I had never been so happy to be cramping in my life, because it meant that I was alive again.
Yes.
It meant that I could feel again. Mm-hmm. And I was so excited for that transition that I just kept pushing through. And I remember that I had run enough. I went to an arena, the indoor game, a box lacrosse game. And I was sitting in the stands, and I had my pads and the stuff in the car, but I was like, wishful thinking. I'm just going to go and watch. I want to be in the energy of that space, of these men that are running around and being able to do what they want to do. And I just want to be in that space. I'm not ready yet, right? That's what I said in my head. So I'm standing there watching, and one of my buddies comes up to me and goes, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "I'm just watching." They're like, "You're not playing?" I'm like, no, I haven't run through, I just went for a run, 2 weeks ago. I'm not ready to get out there and play. And these are guys that had seen me in my prime, that played with and against me in my prime. And they're like, "Dude, just come out." They were so happy to see me. They hadn't seen me in years. They were so excited to see me. They're like, "We just want to be on the field with you and say, I got to play with Neal one time."
Wow.
So I said, "Damn, I got to go get my pads." So I went out and grabbed my pads. And by that summer, I was full on competing back. I was back and working my way. It took me another year and a half to really get back close to the form that I was before. I considered a comeback, but by then I was 35. So I was a little bit older on the professional spectrum, or 36. No, I was 36, 35. Yeah, so I was a little bit older on the professional spectrum. So I was like, maybe I won't come back. But certainly I entertained the idea. I certainly entertained the idea of coming back, but I didn't.
Wow.
So that was a huge transition. But it had a lot to going back to my culture, my heritage, my roots, my stories, but also engaging in deeper knowledges in different spaces, right? I learned way much more about homeopathy and what that meant. I learned a lot about acupuncture, and I was using those type of things. And I actually went and found Indigenous healers and teachers that are engaging in energetic therapies or quantum healing that are based on Indigenous stories that are thousands of years old. And healing practices that are thousands of years old in our structure. And so now I incorporate those things. I support other people's growth energetically through those things today. So that's really exciting to kind of have gone through that transition myself, and then to be able to share it with others. It's an awesome feeling.
Thank you for sharing it with us, because I think that it will help many viewers, because everybody's going through something at some point, right? So thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
I know today you're at Ombuds at Syracuse University, and I know it's a campus resource for conflict management, right, and facilitated conversation. What is one of the main ways that you help students to move out of conflict or anything else that they're going through?
Oh,
as having all that experience and story right behind you, I know, and the Native American culture. So I know there's ways that you can help people, help students.
Yeah, it's such an interesting combination from the therapeutical, the therapeutic perspective that I use with the counseling, teaching, and background, and those type of things that I learned, but then to amplify that and supplement it with this quantum healing spaces and all these other things. So certainly it's allowed me to meet people in a different space, right? So whether they're in a physical space where they physically need to make adjustments to manage conflict, or it's an emotional or a cognitive, thought process, or maybe it is a spiritual thing that they're going through, I'm able to meet them at all of those different spaces because I've used all of those modules myself to develop my own understanding of how I manage my own conflict. So I'm able to meet them in those spaces, help support them in those journeys, and move them through that intrapersonal space. Because that's where really conflict ends up ending up and happening, is that we have an actuating event that triggers an emotional response. That emotional response is really our response. That's what we come out of that triggered event is a bridge that our brain fills in all the gaps of a pattern of what's going to come next, based on something that happened in the past as a kid, as a youth. And so if we can find a way to help track some of those things back and understanding some of those resources of where they come from, or where we can break that bridge and build a brand new bridge to a brand new space, right? It's the difference. If I were to start in Syracuse and I were to start walking a straight line to Buffalo, right? And if I started in Syracuse and made a 1 degree turn and shift, just 1 degree, and walk straight that way, I wouldn't end up in Buffalo. I'd end up in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm. That's where I am.
So all it takes is that 1 degree of change. that 1 degree of shift. And then I can just go on that path and change that path. That's all it takes to change our path. Seems like a lot though. In the moment, that 1 degree is like, it could be 100 degrees, right? For us sometimes in that moment. But once we can understand that that's the essence of it, and we can trust that journey, you know, we might make little moves and adjustments here and there, but we can certainly change drastically change our trajectory with one small little movement. And so that's a lot of what I do and how I support individuals through conflict, is helping them to understand the relationship that they have with themselves, and how that relationship with themselves has transpired externally into their experientials within the conflict of others, and the relationship that they have with those individuals. And so sometimes I'll use my Indigenous stories and knowledges, right? Like we have a story that has its roots in conflict, that one of them goes back over 1,000 years, and its evolution turned into our political system, right? We have 3 branches of government. We have a state and a federal system, and we have checks and balances and collaboration and consensus, and we have one role has a space to veto. These things should all sound familiar for Americans, because the roots of those experiences were influenced by George Washington, Benjamin Franklin. All the founding forefathers of American democracy were engaging in those political structures in communications with my ancestors. And they said, wow, this is actually a pretty good idea. So I was watching the last impeachment trial and watching the process of how things went back and forth, and how they confirmed who would speak and when and how they all sat and listened quietly while one person spoke. I was like, wow, I know where that came from. I recognize that process, because my ancestors have been doing that for over 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when I talk about conflict and understanding it from a cultural perspective, I'm talking about the origin roots of your political system or structure that you're using, that you've been using for a few hundred years. We've been doing this for hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So but I only use those. It depends on the person and where they're at, right? Not everyone is ready to go to that spiritual space. Some people have to stay in that cognitive space. Some people are stuck in the emotional space. Some people need that physical space to understand physically, what am I going to do next, right? What are some techniques and things I can do to change this and move this, right? So it's merely just me being able to meet them where they are, so that when I come from empowerment, the idea is this, and it's very similar to that guy that we had running with the ancestors playing, and you feel that connection and the support around you. When we're in conflict, the support or the cloak that warms us in that cold of feeling alone is that we have options. And so what I do as an ombuds is I help people understand and recognize the cloak of options that they have available to them to manage their conflict. And when we feel like we have options, we feel no longer isolated. We no longer feel that negative space and that negative energy of feeling isolated, but we feel rejuvenated, we feel positive, we feel hopeful. That's a positive energy. So what I do as an ombuds is transitioning their negative energy into a positive energy.
Mm. Wonderful. So tell us just a little bit, we're going to wrap up soon. Tell us a little bit about a daily, I know you mentioned you do a daily ritual. Is there some tips that you can give the viewers today to something that they could do daily to help them on their journey?
Sure. And there's a great video, and I'm going to reference this just so people can look at it. Tom Porter is an amazing spiritual person within the Haudenosaunee, and he's Mohawk. I'm Onondaga, he's Mohawk, so he's one of the other nations within our confederacy. But there's this really cool short video. I think it's part 6 of a bigger part of video that he did, and it's like an 8-minute video. But he actually breaks down the language that he says that his grandmother taught him of things to say in the morning. And he says, right? And what it's really saying is, thank you, the being who created me. I am thankful for all things throughout Mother Earth, right? And I'm thankful for this day. What we're really talking about is that when the sun comes up, it wraps its warm embrace around us and it hugs us. So I'm thankful for that warm embrace, right? If we do the gonna hand you, so this is a shortened version of the gonna hand you. If I were to do that, I would do the whole thing. Now I'm thankful for all of us that have come together today to put our minds together as one and give a great thanks for all of us, right? I give thanks to our Mother Earth that she is here, that she continues to do her duties, and that she shows up and provides life for all beings of Mother Earth. So I give thanks to our great mother, and we put our minds together as one and give a great thanks. And then I would go through everything throughout all of living Earth, because the reality is, Tom Mohawk would say that humanity is still the greatest experiment. It's humanity, life is all trying to see if that humans can still be alive and life can still sustain itself on Mother Earth. Because we're the only beings that are completely reliant on everything else around us. If all the other animals died away, what would we be left to eat, right? If all the vegetables and plants went away, what would we be left with, right? If the wind stopped coming, if the rain stopped traveling, if the moon and the sun stopped traveling around and we stopped, that relationship ceased to exist, what would happen to us? We are all dependent on all of those things. And so the morning practice is to give thanks, that I am thankful that I'm able to wake up this morning and to enjoy all of those things, all of life beings, the life beings that's within the stones, the things that are on the ground and underneath that. We look at inanimate objects and we look at that as having, as a Seneca would say, orenda, or a spirit. So we're thankful to all those spirits. When we do a sweat lodge, we put those stones in and we give thanks to our grandfathers, the stones, that they have given their life to give off their heat so that we can have healing. We're dependent even on those things. So in that, we have to respect and honor our space within the cosmos, and that we are dependent on all other life, right? If we were to pollute all the water, right, we would cease to exist once again. So, I know that there's young people that are in colleges now. There's one at the Environmental Science and Forestry, ESF, at Syracuse University. He's studying water and he's writing it and investigating it and studying it as if the water, one single river, is a being, is a human. He's named it as a person. He references to it as a person and a being, and he speaks to it as another being of life, right? And that goes, you can go back to the Hawaiian practice of Ho'oponopono, right? And going through those processes and understanding what those mean to move into forgiveness. So those are all daily practices that I use that help to support me, to get me into that space, so that when I show up as an ombuds, right? So I've had plenty of people say, oh my gosh, you're dealing with conflict every day? That must be tiring. You must be exhausted. All you do is hear people complain all day long, and then you gotta go fix it. And I'm like, no, I am invigorated by those experiences. I am charged up by those, because what I see is transformation with every person that comes into my office. And my assistant will even say it. She's told people that have come into my office, she said, I don't know what happens in that room. They come in, they're crying, they're upset, they're sad. They go in, I hear crying, I hear laughter. They come out, they're smiling. I don't know what he does in there. I just know that they go in crying, they come out smiling. And the lady that she told that to went in, did the thing, came out, and she said, Judy, I know exactly what you're talking about. He's awesome. Thank you very much. And like, if I need it, I know where to go. I'll be back again. And that's what charges me up, is to see that transformation and see that moment. It's just the moment. As a seed, when we plant a seed, we have seed songs that our women sing when they plant the seeds for every year when we do our planting ceremonies, and the women's plant the seeds, and they sing the seed songs for all the plants. And that seed, it gets a little bit of water, right? And then it feels the sun. And in order for that seed to grow, it has to implode on itself before a sprout can come up, and before it can come up and become whatever it's going to become. And we put that positive energy in that seed through those songs so that we give it life, so that it will come up and grow into a wonderful, beautiful tree or a plant or whatever it's going to become, or apple tree or fruit or whatever it's going to become. But that seed has to implode. We all as individuals, as we go through our transitions, through our conflicts, is another opportunity for us as seeds to implode on ourselves and grow and become that flower that we're going to be. And so that's what I am thankful for every morning, is that I have another opportunity to grow and to maneuver, and that every conflict is an opportunity for me to grow and learn more about myself and learn more about the people around me that I might interact with.
Wow.
And so that's how I support others through conflict, but also how I grow through it myself every day.
Thank you so much, Neal. We really appreciate it. All your time today, your love, your stories and everything. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity. I always don't get to talk about my journey through some of those transitions, so that was actually therapeutic and helpful for me to feel that emotional connection to those experiences, because it was such a powerful moment in who I am now, to understand that I did have to go through some pretty terrible things, and we all have those things that we've gone through, and knowing that we can survive, that once we have that cloak of options, we have support and we're not alone. That it's an amazing feeling to have, and I love, as an Ombuds, having the opportunity to be there to help to remind people that they're not alone.
Wow, that's very powerful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So today we had wonderful Neal Powless on with us, a Native American. And viewers, please make sure you click his links below, and that you give some comments and thoughts and some love going for him. And so that was Neal Powless, and I'm Mita Wise. That's it for today. And we've had a lot of wonderful wisdom shared today, and we will see you soon. Thank you.
Onondaga, nyawaha.